Transmission costs for the Humboldt Sentinel are brought to you in part by KGOE News Talk 1480. KGOE 1480 is the predominantly progressive news talk station in Humboldt County that is also the radio home of the Humboldt Crabs.
Welcome to this episode of Sentinel Interviews here at the Access Humboldt Community Media Center in Eureka. And with me is a very special guest, Jimmy Smith, back on Sentinel Interviews 4 years later after getting reelected to a third term on the Humboldt County Board of Supervisors. Jimmy, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Charles. I have been looking forward to this.
And Jimmy, just let us know right off the bat what it means to you to be in front of the Humboldt County viewing audience, having served just about 12 years on the Humboldt County Board of Supervisors and rounding out your career in elective office.
Well, no greater honor than working for the people that I do in Humboldt County. I have, as you know, this tremendous district. It's gorgeous. All these individual communities within my district, from the city of Eureka right up the street, all the way down to the top of Wilder Ridge, which is way down in southern Humboldt. So there's a uniqueness, having spent so much of my life on the ocean and in the bays doing research work and that type of thing, that I would get to represent people in Eureka and King Salmon and Fields Landing, Humboldt Hill, Cutton and Lolita and Ferndale and Petrolia and clear out to Honeydew and up on top of the ridge. It's gorgeous, gorgeous country. The Lost Coast is most predominantly in the First District. And the people have come together for any number of problems and assisted me in trying to make things better. They've just been super. So it's a great, great, great honor to work for them. A little difficult at times having thousands of bosses, but it's been a great honor.
And let us know how that process has worked out. You've been working with Supervisor-elect Rex Bone, and you've decided to step down just a few months early and hand off the baton to Mr. Bone, who was elected overwhelmingly by the voters last month. Is that going smoothly for you?
It's going very well, and as you know, we had talked a little earlier, I'm going through a bit of an illness thing, and about the time we were coming up on the June election, I was getting the final diagnosis from my doctors and talking to my family, and we wanted to wait till the election was over to really figure out exactly what I needed to do. And once it was, and Rex was elected, it made my decision easier. The doctors had very succinctly said that I needed to concentrate on my recovery. They sensed that this may be an offshoot of a serious illness I had 20 years ago. So it's going to require a lot of concentration to get through it, and you know, ups and downs with the treatment. So moving forward and doing an early resignation, it'll probably amount to about 5 months, was really tough for me. I had counted on working with Rex over a longer period of time, or the winter of the election, and trying to figure out exactly how we could transition and make sure the communities were well aware that we were teaming up, and trying to make sure that all the community-based projects were going to be carried forward, as well as the regional ones. And I have to say that it is going really, really well. It took a lot of pressure off me. I think following the doctor's directions and my family, and knowing that Rex now is just, he's been more than willing. He's stepped up and he's been there on every occasion. So I'm feeling really good about this work together, and how we'll be able to carry on the projects that need to be brought forward for all our constituents.
So serving on the board these last couple of years, certainly you've been the senior supervisor. Nobody else on the board has been on there more than a couple of years. In the cases of Supervisors Bass and Sundberg, I think Lovelace just got reelected for the first time. What's it been like kind of being the one on the board who everyone else turned to for that kind of institutional memory?
Well, I'm really lucky. My board is just, they are just the best. They're smart, they like to work, they have a tremendous amount of energy, and their attitudes are, you can't imagine what a pleasure it is to work with them. There isn't a need for me to be, I mean, the senior guy just means that I guess I'm older, and they'd love to tell me that. But they're so dedicated to their work, and they have such strong ethics that they don't need to rely on me at all. They're a very, very capable group, and for me it's a lot of fun to work with them. So we share responsibilities, we backfill for each other whenever there's a need for information. It's effectively passed so that people know where to go for advice, what the best department head, what the best agency representative is, and they're on it. They have just great skills, and I'm very proud of them.
Now, you might be being a little modest there at a recent board meeting where you read your letter, both to the board and to the governor. Ryan Sundberg said he looked up to you as a mentor and one of the finest gentlemen he's ever known. Virginia Bass said much the same thing. Did that really touch you?
It did. That was, I think, one of the hardest things ever to read those. I pinned those 2 letters on my desk and presented them to the board and to the public that day, and it was really, really hard. And I know, and I heard from my colleagues, they were really, I think, at times overly kind, and they don't credit themselves enough. They were emphasizing, my importance, but it's a team, and it's the years now that I've worked with them, and some of the other supervisors I've had the great honor to work with. You do it as a team, and they're just incredibly talented. They get it instantly. You can watch the meetings, and you'll see some of the discussions that take place. And just a few days ago, I wore down, was not feeling real well. Went home in the morning before the rail trail item came up, and I just knew that they were going to handle it effectively and politely, and they were going to use the best documentation at hand. I couldn't wait. When it was all over with, I got the word to them, and I said, my gosh, I wish there were other legislative bodies that worked as well as you all did. They came up with a perfect solution. They compromised. They were just, I thought, incredible. They did a great job. So it's nice that Ryan and Virginia and Mark and Cliff would say the things that they do, and some of my colleagues in the councils and special districts. But the truth is, they're just capable people who believe with all their hearts they can do the job, and they can.
Well, there was a tense moment there where it looked like there might have been edging towards a 2-2 deadlock, and but then some compromise language came out. So you weren't there, and obviously you can speak freely now because you're not prejudging or influencing a decision. The board's decision's been made. Were you satisfied with that compromise, that they would support the formation of a committee to look at the rail banking, but also not prejudice themselves against looking at an east-west rail corridor feasibility study?
Yes. It was, in my opinion, I thought it was perfect. They didn't eliminate any component of it, and that's a a diverse audience, the trails and rails, and it's tough to get everybody to agree to some sort of a compromise, and I thought they did excellent. And it's definitely not the first time that's happened, and now where they will be delving into more of the detail in the general plan update. Tuesday we'll be looking at providing a list of categories that will go back to the public again. That too will be another stage for compromise. And I have no doubt that between our staff, Martha Spencer stepped up as the interim planning building director, and the work that the board's done and the other staff members, the public input, the agency input, that there'll be some compromises there again. And I have every confidence that they'll come through.
Would you say that's been probably the most controversial subject in general in your time on the board, are planning, building, development issues in general? It sure seemed like there's a lot of controversy with Mr. Gerard's tenure, with the reorganization of the departments, and there's kind of been some back and forth on how those departments have shifted around.
Yeah, I've been, controversial or not, I guess I've been in a lot of major projects, and some of them, as we talked about a little while ago, were more community oriented, but still very controversial. The cleanup in King Salmon, working with PG&E and the nuclear decommissioning, the South Spit, we talked about that huge cleanup, and how are we going to deal with some of the homeless issues there. And then Ferndale, of course, the Salt River Project with 42 landowner agreements, trying to get people to look at the big picture and their neighbors, and how are we going to get things done so that the city's going to be safe from flooding. And there's been a bunch of them. But I have to agree with you. I save notes with my constituent contacts, and I have for 12 years nearly. So I have tablets where I'll write the name and the phone number and maybe a note or two about that individual call. And that's not counting the emails, but I estimated I had over 10,000 of those contacts. This has been a couple of years ago, and I have more now. And I would say that probably the majority of those had to do with planning, building, land use issues. And to some degree, there were a lot of times neighborhood things.
And some of those same names keep popping up over and over.
Yeah, at times they do, but it's a huge district, so there are different things that happen. Everything from a small change in a lot line adjustment for a Williamson Act contract, so that a rancher can take advantage of land that maybe he couldn't use prior to that or get it included, to a huge neighborhood dispute over some sort of business that's occurring right in the middle of a neighborhood, where there's a clash over commercial and residential uses. And a lot of times you have to go back and track. We did that this morning on a project. A person's water supply is at risk, and how do we fold in making sure they have ample amounts of water for their home that they've lived in for 50 years, and make it not too difficult for them to be able to go out and get their water supply upgraded.
Do you think that was what Mr. Gerard was primarily running into, is just he had such a large department that grew during his over a decade of service leading what was community development services, and it just became too much for any one person to be able to manage effectively, looking at both natural resources and economic development and all the planning and building issues?
Yes, I think it was a big job for one person, and You know, the board did, over the years, make a lot of investments in that department to try and make it a little smoother and easier for the administration or the director to move ahead with some of the objectives. If I were to speak candidly about the department from my experience, I would say there still remains some weaknesses that I hope will be overcome in the planning building divisions. And I know that they're aware of what the board would like to see. In Kirk, there were a lot of different opinions, and certainly you and everybody else has heard about that at either general plan meetings or when a project comes forward, Forrester Gill or whatever it may be, and how explosive those things can be. What really helped Kirk, and he's never maybe got all the credit he should, is when we went to our regional planning effort and we joined up with this new philosophy of having the northern counties come together and do a competition for water bond monies, because we didn't have the resources to upgrade our infrastructure. And a lot of the smaller districts especially didn't have the expertise at hand to be able to generate good applications. So anyway, we took that on, and Kirk was a big part of that. And he was able to put enough effort into those planning sessions as a technical team member for Humboldt, and I was on the policy team during the formative years. He gained a lot of respect from those other counties in being able to fold into that a background with community development services and pieces of the public works interaction too. So where there may have been other, say, weaknesses in admin over those bigger department things that brought forward a lot of complaints, in that end of it, bringing home literally the project money with the policy team and the other technical team members was it was a good job, and it was you know, a great accomplishment for our county to have the team that we did to make those things happen.
You're listening to Sentinel Interviews. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Sentinel Interviews, a very special episode here with Jimmy Smith, retiring 1st District Supervisor of Humboldt County. We were just speaking about Mr. Gerard's tenure in Community Development Services. It seemed like the board kind of had some back and forth as far as what it was going to do with this empire that Gerard built. They first were going to move economic development and natural resources into its own sort of departments, and now they've sort of chopped those in half, given natural resources to public works, and given economic development, I believe at this point, to the Chief Administrative Officer's office. That office in itself, the CAO, Philip Smith Haynes, obviously a competent administrator, but it seems like he has a lot of hats to wear now, a lot of different departments in there.
He does have a lot of hats, and we've given him some difficult tasks. But when Kirk decided that he was going to move on, this matrix that we had looked at forming with new management protocols became a little bit more complicated. He said, I'm moving, I'm going to take this position, and we hadn't really identified all of the details that we needed to for this transition of economic development and natural resources. So it became apparent that suddenly we had a chance to look at how can we save money too. And so the budget subcommittee, which was Supervisor Sundberg and myself, sat down and we looked at it from a budget perspective, and we thought, well, this might be worth some discussion if we were able to talk to a public works director and to the CAO about these possibilities. Well, in fact, the CAO's office has actually been working on economic development's budget for quite a while. They've had some complications with their budgets, so they've been engaged with them a lot. And that was sort of natural to just make that official and have that team component come back together. And we also had hoped at that time that that Philip Smith Haynes would be able to beef up where he had cut down and consolidated the CAO's different departmental responsibilities, to bring it back up a little bit so that he could be able to manage very effectively. And secondly, our Natural Resources Division is a bit scattered. We had Hank Seaman taking care of levees and doing restoration documents, environmental documents, trying to stay in compliance with the regional board on some of the landfill sites, doing environmental documents for road work, flooding that was occurring in other places, and the list just goes on and on. Jacobs Avenue, for example, that levee system. So he is really aware of what the details were that were taking place. He got in the mix on the Klamath and the Trinity, worked on Redwood Creek, Mad River, where we have levee systems and other issues at the mouth with parks, and so I'm really happy with it. We're going to save money in the short term, and in the longer term, I think we'll build a strong, cost-efficient, really bright team of young people who have tremendous, just great attitudes and a long list of accomplishments.
Well, obviously the departments for now have stabilized. Gerard's moved on to Santa Clara County, and Martha Spencer obviously has quite a bit of experience in public outreach. Her relatively short amount of tenure there at Building and Planning seems to be well received so far. Even some of the development community folks who are critical seem to be pretty welcoming of her attitude. Yet the general plan itself seems just as controversial as ever. And some of the shortlist process that the board is looking at, I think one lobby group came up with a shortlist that was everything in the general plan. Mm-hmm. Not a very short list, as some of the supervisors were saying. At what point are the board just going to have to kind of cut their losses and start over, as some are suggesting, or do you think a short list can still be come up with and still be worked through by the board in a reasonable time frame in the next few months?
Well, the only part of that question I'm not sure about is a reasonable time frame. I think that the board gave direction on what they wanted to see, and the comparative analysis with the input from whether it's an advocate group or whether it was the individuals that came in to cross-reference and see which ones came up the most, and then bring them forward along with the ones that staff had identified that were questionable because of mixed votes by the Planning Commission. I think that was absolutely a really good way to go. And I can tell you that I've looked at the document that's it's in my packet, and it looks good. They have the public comments all identified and they've sorted through them to find out the ones that are similar and where they would fit. And I think the discussion will be good, and I think there'll be some good public input, and the board will move ahead with whatever the list is going to be. I really can't imagine, and I could be wrong, I only get to speak for me, and it's likely when the ultimate decisions are there that Supervisor-elect Bone will be making more of those than I will, because I'll be moving on. But I think they'll get through it, but I also think it's going to take longer than anticipated. Very complicated, very controversial, and we'll just have to make the best of it we can. And I think staff's ready for that. If you've noticed in the recent meetings, they have been very, very accommodating, trying to get everything they can into the documents and get them back in front of the board in as timely a fashion as possible. But there are so many things happening, so many demands on staff and on board members too, to be in certain places and working on other projects, that it's going to be, it was time consuming for the Planning Commission. I don't perceive that it'll be that time consuming for the board with a lot of the work done, but it still will take, I think, more time than a person thinks to wrap this general plan up, and who knows what'll happen with the world of litigation. It seems like we get sued every other day, so that could slow things down too.
Obviously, you're not permitted, nor is any other member of the board permitted to talk about some of the details of those lawsuits, but a lot of them seem to have centered around the Williamson Act, and I don't think a lot of folks who aren't in the agricultural community really even know what that is. How much of that talk has dominated your time on the board, just trying to figure out how to best implement that?
Well, there is litigation, of course, ongoing over the Williamson Act, and as you know, we were going through an audit with the state of California years ago, and we wound up in litigation over the Williamson Act. So we have taken corrective action and are trying to move forward with that. But the Williamson Act itself, and again, only my opinion, is absolutely critical to the economic viability of Humboldt County. It's so important to have working ranch lands, to have working farms, to have, whether it's orchards, or whether it's timber harvest, or whether it's cattle, dairies. They're all absolutely essential. And it's difficult now for those people who are out there working from daylight till well after dark on a daily basis to make a go of it and bring their families into it. We've seen some ranches. There's one, as a matter of fact, we have some Williamson Act contract applications coming forward for the board's consideration next Tuesday. And it's no surprise that we're supporters. Supervisor Clendenin and I talked about this because of our continuity with some of those ranches. But they are, the competition for some of those lands have driven the price of agricultural lands up to a premium. And it's hard for those folks to make payments on land, raise the product that they need to survive, and then pay a tax rate based on a land value that it's overvalued to some degree just because of competition where some of the public agencies or nonprofits have purchased land.
So that's not so much to do with the housing bubble and more to do with even land trusts that want to snap up land and put it in some sort of conservation easement? Or?
Well, not so much the easements, I don't think, because the easements seem to be working pretty well. We worked on a couple on a major project down in the Eel Valley where the landowner gets the easement payment, but at the same time they get to use the land. It stays, for the most part, in agricultural production. But the raising of the values, that's the part that makes it difficult for a person who's just starting out in business or wants to add land base to increase their agricultural productivity, whether it's a few more head of beef or whether it's a bigger orchard or whatever it might be. So the Williamson Act comes in then, and it gives them a reduction in those taxes on that land to the point where they can sustain themselves, at least to a higher degree. In my mind, it's not a subsidy as much as trying to keep those people working and make those lands productive. And that's the icon for Humboldt County. When I worked with Humboldt Creamery a long time ago, they were really concerned about some of those parcels that were ranches and smaller dairies going away, maybe going to families that moved from other places and You know, they could keep it in a ranchland status, but it wasn't really producing the milk that they needed maybe for the creamery or for the cheeses. This is, from my perspective, from my district, it's maintaining that character that we want to have, and it's trying to help with the economic viability of those products that are so key to Humboldt County. So it's a small price to pay to include those people in the Williamson Act contracts and give them a little bit of a tax break, and then take advantage of the economies that they build and the employment that they're providing. It's an easy trade, in my opinion.
At the same time, though, you're giving somebody a tax break that puts that much more pressure on the county budget. You managed to have a balanced budget this year, build back your reserves just a little bit, but still far below where the board says in their policy they should be at, several $1 million.
Yes.
And I think you've built them back up to something like 800,000. At what point does that become a lot of tension? Because then if you're losing those lands from productive value, putting them in a land trust or selling them to the state or federal government for park or forest land, well, then you're not getting any tax money at all off of that.
Well, I just, I guess would go back to my philosophy on it is that the employment they provide and the productivity that they have generated that's going to build into the economy. Look at grass-fed beef, look at Lolita cheese, they have their own dairy. Look at those businesses that have, they're really very viable, and they're vibrant when you talk about the economy. So keeping them in place is worth that small subsidy. It just doesn't make sense to try and make them pay top dollar for a piece of farmland and maintain the wetland perimeters around them and all the things that they've got a fairly significant regulatory burden to shoulder as well. So keeping them in that light of economic productivity is really important. It far outweighs the little bit of difference there might be in a general fund contribution. It's not as significant, I don't think, as some people would think. It's more important to have those families doing exactly what they're doing for all of us.
You're watching Sentinel Interviews here at the Access Humboldt Community Media Center. We'll be back right after these messages.
Enjoy your guys' circle jerk.
So were you told you couldn't let your children play?
Yeah, gave me a ticket to boot. I don't know what.
We're back for the second half of Sentinel Interviews with Jimmy Smith, retiring Humboldt County Supervisor from the 1st District, something of an exit interview. We were just talking about General Plan, Williamson Act, keeping those farmers and ranchers on their land. Aside from the pressures of the governments and regulation and nonprofits wanting to snap up the land, it seemed like the Planning Commission, they had their divisions, but they were pretty unified, hearing from the North Coast Grower Association folks like John LaBoito and others who really wanted to make sure that working agricultural lands stayed that way. And is it really the development pressures, the pressures of sprawl and churning ag land into housing? In the long run, isn't that more the danger that those folks face in terms of converting resource lands?
To some degree, depending on where they're at. Some will never be converted just simply because of their locations. Lolita, Mad River Bottoms, the Valley, and the list sort of goes on. Even Redwood Creek Valley. A lot of those they're never going to change their characteristics to be able to accommodate growth to speak of outside of maybe a second unit or farm housing or something like that. In some of the outlying areas, it will be a topic of much discussion coming up, what will happen with timber production zones and how large they should be to accommodate additional housing to manage their timber and their lands. And we've heard a lot over the years about the importance of if you own the property and you follow the rules, can you build a home there? And we're gonna hear more about that. There have been more regulatory actions by the state of California with fire safe, with roads that would allow fire services or emergency services to get in on those properties. Those will play a bigger part. The water issue, which is part of one of the elements in the general plan update, will play a larger issue on what happens and how water is extracted, or maybe how water is going to be stored so that it can provide for the people who want to live on their land. So those are all yet to come back one more time for what I expect to be some very heightened conversation. And I suspect that the board will really look closely at those conversations that occurred and, with the Planning Commission and the public that weighed in on that. And there's little doubt in my mind that it will take longer than staff is projected to go through those again.
As someone who stepped back from the election process per se this go around, I'm sure you saw as well as I did the big money from some of those construction, development, real estate interests in the local elections. Some of them seem to kind of act as a block in favor of not only your successor, but also Ms. Fennell and Ms. Brooks up there in 3rd District. Mm-hmm. Do you think the influence of big money has really kind of gotten out of hand over the last 12 years?
Well, from a personal perspective, I really do believe that, you know, it'd be nice to have some kind of donor controls for local elections. It gets to the point where a lot of the people that donated on both sides of the elections in the last June, a lot of those were folks that have donated bits and pieces over the years to my election too. I think it was more a product of there were so many things avalanching at one time or another, and the business community is, some of them are sending a message out that, you know, we want to see things friendly, we want to see businesses flourish again, and this economy has not helped things at all too. To bring it down to a level where there could be just an election based on objectives and what a person's dreams are, what they'd like to accomplish when they're in office, that would be nice, and do it at some reasonable level. There aren't any. There are no caps. And there's, given the courts and what they've said in recent time, I doubt that that's going to happen very soon. So that's what it's going to be. They're going to be expensive elections. People are going to weigh in for one reason or another, and they're never going to be, at least in the immediate future, they're not going to be at what I would think was a reasonable level. One of the things that I had the great honor of doing in my last election was thanking people and mailing checks back. It was pretty unique that we set a goal and we met it, and we did our media campaign, and then people kept an outpouring of support, and so we beefed up the campaign, and we bought more time, and we bought more signs, and we had wonderful friends and wonderful supporters and a great district. But it just kept coming, and people were just, and Jackie and I talked about it, so we sat down, and I was able to just write notes and thank people. We just stopped, and we sent back a lot of money, thousands of dollars, and it was a lot of fun to write notes to people and say thank you. You're just wonderful to be such a great supporter, but we've surpassed our fondest dreams for a campaign, and I have to say in all truthfulness now too that, you know, we had a really good idea this is my last term, and I was looking forward to retirement after this. So it was easier for me to do it than it would be for somebody else that was going to want to save and pay off campaign debt And
That's not a decision a lot of elected officials have made. Some of them not only have beefed up a war chest for future election campaigns, but also saw their friends and allies running for other offices and would use their own campaign committee money to throw money at other local election candidates.
yeah, and I have to say that I have a little bit left over, and I may well do the same thing because I'm I have no goal in mind of running for political office. I do hope someday to work with the Brown administration, but in a volunteer form. I have no reason to ever run for public office again. So I don't, I had people say, well, you could have kept it and put it in this fund or helped with that one, and I very simply said, that's not what I think the election is about. I think when people give you the check and they want you to run, it's because they think you can do the job and there will be some accomplishment that will be a benefit to the people that you work for. And to go beyond that just wasn't, I do not blame people for doing it, and I fully understand it. But my commitment was to do that based on the needs of my campaign. And beyond that, I didn't need it.
You mentioned trying to accomplish one's dreams while in office. Let's get into that for a minute. What would you say your dream was when you first ran, and how much of those dreams do you think have been realized, and how much of them were perhaps out of reach for anybody in local government, considering how much power and money have been grabbed by the state and the feds?
Well, it has been tough. We've been up and down cycles for the 12 years that I've been doing this, and actually 5 years before that, when I was on the Harbor Commission, there were ups and downs. And I was able to step in at the very last part of the deepening project for Humboldt Bay, which carried its own little weight of controversy with it. But the fact was, it was accomplished in a large part due to some good staff. I moved on from that, and I had hoped that we could do some good things. And we did with the South Spit, thanks in a large part to the Mark Wheatleys and the Kevin Forresters and Mike Thompson, who got in his rig and drove out when he was in the state senate and sat down with me on Table Bluff and went over every detail. Karen Kovacs, Don Cook from Department of Fish and Game, my good friend Linda Roush, who is the area manager for BLM. And of course, Mark Wheatley was on the ground every day out there with us. Just a team of incredible people that made that happen. And look what we have now. We took hundreds of tons of garbage off there and recaptured public use. And equally as important, we have water quality back. We've got all historical activities. People can gather wood. Tribal members and all can fish. There's a hunting season, and it's managed. It's not everything everybody wanted, but it came back together. Incredible team of people. We hit Howard Street when I first, you may remember we had a horrible crime outbreak over in Howard Street next to the cemetery.
There's some drug houses out there, right?
We had some bad drug houses, and so we gathered, the neighborhood called, we had some neighborhood meetings, we got together, and long story short, after months of background work, we went in with, I got to pull these meetings together, and I had great support from Gary Phillip and Mike Downey, and we cleaned up, we tagged, we pulled cars out, we pulled garbage out, we took piles of tires and cleaned up lots, and I think in the end worked with Dr. Holman, who was looking at the possibilities of rebuilding some affordable housing in there. And he did that. He stepped up to the plate, and it's not perfect. There's still some problems, but it isn't what it was. And the same thing happened in King Salmon. First elected, and I knew a lot of the people there, knew what they were. We had 2 murders. We had some heroin overdoses. We had junk cars and trailers and old buses and packs of dogs, and just, it was a mess. And they called me down to a community meeting at Gill's in King Salmon, who are great friends of mine, and there was no room. There was 120 people. The deck was full, outside the door and inside the restaurant was full, and they said, we want help, and we want it now. And that community came together. The same team was formed with, there's an agency that oversees mobile home parks. There was some new property exchanges that had taken place, and we got those people together. We walked the streets and talked to everybody. I went back in the evenings after we talked to them and talked to them again. And we eventually got people into treatment, or we got them into housing. We got things cleaned up around there, but the community was more than willing to do that in both those examples. They were part of the impetus to get change in those neighborhoods and make things happen. Still not perfect, but the transition's occurring. We now have King Salmon's tsunami ready. We have a siren system that's in both Fields Landing and King Salmon. PG&E's been a tremendous partner in that. And hopefully when the infrastructure is all in place, we'll continue to see new building, new activities, more economic vitality in those communities like that, and things will be better.
You're watching Sentinel Interviews here at the Access Humboldt Community Media Center. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Sentinel Interviews, our final segment with First District Supervisor Jimmy Smith. Jimmy, we were just talking about restoring communities as one of the things you were dreaming of being able to accomplish and were able to do, either in the South Spit, Howard Street, King Salmon. You got involved first in the Harbor District before becoming First District Supervisor. You're talking about restoring the fishing community there in King Salmon. That kind of stems from your own personal background, your career as a fisherman, I believe.
It did, and I remember when Stan Dixon, my predecessor on the Board of Supervisors, was encouraging me to run, and I was excited about it, but at the same time I said to Stan, I'm worried about, you know, I have some budgeting experience and I feel good about local governance and accountability. I feel good about all those things, but there's so much I don't know. I'm a natural resources guy. I mean, I came from the ocean, and I did all this work with birds and fish inland, and then he said, and so what's the problem? He said, that's what Humboldt County is. It's what we want to have, and I always thought that was a great compliment that Stan had made, and it kind of pushed me off into maybe bringing a little bit of that to the board. And I have such great boards of supervisors, and the interworking with those other councils and Chamber of Commerces and in the First District has been truly amazing. And then they asked me a few years ago if I would, we had what we called the five county salmon restoration group, and they did a lot of road things, trying to make fish-friendly crossings and culverts and road activities, and they were a very accomplished group, and anyway, I got to join them. And out of that spun this, we think we could be bigger and stronger and So this 7-county group was formed, and they asked me when they were doing this formative thing if I would help steer it and accept the chairmanship. And I said, okay, I'll try it, but it sounds pretty daunting. And in the end, of course, we came up with this 7-county alliance: Sonoma, Mendocino, Humboldt, Del Norte, Trinity, Modoc, and Siskiyou. And through that effort, we became the most successful regional advocate in the state of California. Not because of me, but because we had 7 boards of supervisors and councils involved in that effort, and then we ultimately incorporated tribal governance for the first time ever in the state of California. We sort of drew the map for it, and I think they'll be replicated in other regions now. So that's been fun, to be a little part of a gigantic team that has some major accomplishments.
Well, when you're out at sea, I imagine it's self-sacrifice and teamwork that keeps the ship afloat, literally. Would you say that's been kind of part of your personal ethos you've tried to bring into government?
I like to work, so that part's been fun. You know, whether it's a night or a Sunday or whatever it takes if somebody's in a jam and you need to help. So the work ethic probably came from there, maybe from the ocean, because you better know how to do it all, or you're not gonna survive. But more than that, I enjoy it, whether it's working on the grounds with an inmate crew or a swap crew, being out there with correctional officers, or whether it's being with in the middle of a disaster in the middle of the night with the City of Eureka council members and Dave Tyson and Mike Knight and Rob Wall and Kurt Gerlich and all the team that we've got doing that, or over in Ferndale after an earthquake with Jay Parrish, the city manager, and Ken Merzwa and the whole city council. It is like the biggest honor ever. I mean, these people are working their hearts out to make things better for people, and if you can go do that, be a little part of it, provide a little bit of energy, then that makes you think about maybe helped a little bit.
Well, you look at public opinion polling, and generally local government is held in pretty high esteem by the general population, certainly compared to single-digit approval ratings for Congress, or pretty low for the president. Would you say that more than anything, if people want to change whatever dysfunction they see in our political system, bringing decisions and power and funding authority down to the local level, away from the feds and even the state, would that lead to more effective and good government in general?
I honestly think it would. Now, we've been lucky because we have, our local representatives have been good, and I could point to things like the recent Marine Life Protection Act, and how Senator Evans, Senator Wiggins before that, and Wes Chesbrough have weighed in to help make sure that voices were heard along here. And the continuity of having them on board, along with the staff members like they have with John Woolley and Tom Weslow and Zaretti Gooseby, they have been there, and they are like my primary contact list to get through those problems. But I think you're absolutely correct in this regional perspective. This team that we formed 7 years ago now, I think, and I was telling Ryan, who is the other member of that policy team with me, Ryan Sundberg, that there is an opportunity to bypass part of the state bureaucracy. And I don't say that with because they are our partners in accessing those regional funds for infrastructure. But the fact is that we now have a high level of expertise that our team has developed. And the technical people we have from all 7 counties, they come from public works backgrounds, from planning, community development services backgrounds, from agriculture, from all of that, so they can put the pieces together. There could be a point, and it would be part of my dream, where that money would flow for those infrastructure projects directly to a regional body, And then that regional body makes a decision, like they have, to have Humboldt administer those projects for those 7 counties in that region. That bypasses a tremendous amount of money, and it puts it in the hands of the local governments where the expertise really is in how to get the job done, I think, for the least amount of money. That's a huge hope. So
last question, Jimmy. What would you say is your fondest wish for not only your successor, Mr. Bohm, but for the board that you're leaving behind? I know you're still going to be connected with them, still working with the dam settlement agreement with that 7-county
yes.
integrated partnership. What would you say is your fondest wish for them going forward? How can they best continue to serve the voters of Humboldt County?
Well, just continue to do what they're doing, and I do want to compliment Cheryl for, she put her heart into this race, and she and I have worked together for a long time, and she's an absolutely wonderful lady. I really want to thank Rex. He has been on board here. He's been with me almost every day, and starting the middle of this month, he'll be with me every day. In fact, that I'm here and not at a meeting somewhere, going over every detail, trying to make sure, genuinely, he wants to make sure that he understands each little piece of the community, and he knows people and he knows places. So and he's got an incredible memory. So he is going to be just great. I'm going to enjoy the last few weeks of my work, getting to work side by side with him, and we've done quite a lot of that already. We're going to be out in some public works projects, and the rest of the board is fully accomplished. They need nothing from me. They are on track. They're smart. They're, they just are so accomplished that they're gonna do well. I'll be in and out to see them and say hello, but they don't need me at all. They don't need me. They're just doing super. And I was lucky. I had people like Paul Kirk and John Woolley and Roger Radoni and Bonnie Neely, and I had people, Stan Dixon, Irv Renner, ahead of me that sort of laid out a course, and I could watch. I followed them around, as a young guy, watching how they got things done, and I learned little pieces even with a short memory, and they taught me a lot. So I will retire with all the confidence in the world that we have a great board of supervisors, and I'm surrounded by good councils and good administrators in the cities and special districts that have just done a tremendous job, and they'll do wonderful.
Well, voted the most popular public official in Humboldt County. I know Humboldt County is a better place for having been represented by you. And Jimmy, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Charles. It's been a treat.